So good day everyone. I'm Heart Startle Candy Timbang. So for today's topic, we're going to discuss about the Neobehaviorism by Tolman and Bandura. So this is our learning outcomes. At the end of the lesson, the student will be able to explain Tolman purposive behaviorism, explain Bandura's social learning theory, and give a specific application of each theory in teaching. So before we proceed to our discussion, we're going to have an activity, which is solve the maze. So I will give you a 5 minutes to answer this problem. Are you ready, everyone? So let's start. Okay, everyone, time's up. Kindly pass your papers so we can proceed to our topic, which is the neo-behaviorism. So you can see that an advanced organizer of neo-behaviorism showing the Tolman's purposive behaviorism and Bandura learning theory. So before we proceed to the Tolman purposive behaviorism, let's talk about the activity that you did earlier. You just found out that the second maze is easier, am I right? This is because you saw that the two mazes were identical, except that the entrance and exit points were reversed. Your experience in doing maze A helped you answer the maze B a lot easier. Am I correct, everyone? Because people create mental maps of things they perceive. So these mental maps help you respond to other things or tasks later, especially if you see the similarity. You may begin to respond with trial and error or the behavioristic, but later on your response become more internally driven or the cognitive perspective. This is what neo-behaviorism is about. It has aspect of behaviorism, but it also reaches to the cognitive perspective. So there are two theories reflecting neo-behaviorism that stand out. The Edward Tolman purposive behaviorism and Albert Bandura social learning theory. So both theories are influenced by behaviorism, which is focused on external elements in learning. But their principle seems to also be reflective of the cognitive perspective or focus on more internal elements. So let's talk about the Tolman purposive behaviorism. So what is purposive behaviorism? It has also been referred to as sign learning theory and is often seen as a link between behaviorism and cognitive theory. So, Tolman theory was founded on two psychological views, those of the Gestalt psychologist and those of John Watson, the behaviorist. Also, Tolman believed that learning is a cognitive process. Learning involved forming beliefs and obtaining knowledge about the environment, and then revealing the knowledge through purposeful and goal-directed behavior. So under Tolman purposive behaviorism, he has a key concept, and one of it is a goal-directedness. He believed that learning is always purposive and goal-directed. So sinasabi niya talagang ang pag-aaral ay laging may layunin at nakadirekta sa kung ano ang kanyang layunin. And also, Tolman believed that individuals do more than merely respond to a stimuli. They act on beliefs, attitudes, changing conditions, and they strive toward goals. So, talagang sinasabi niya na ang isang tao ay kumikilos sila ayon sa mga paniniwala, sa loobin, pagbabago ng mga kondisyon, at nagsusumikap talagang patungo sa kanilang layunin or their goals. And he saw behavior as holistic, purposive, and cognitive. Talagang my goal-directedness. So, let's proceed to the cognitive maps. So let's talk about the cognitive map. So in his famous experiment, one group of rats was placed at a random starting location in a maze, but the food was always in the same location. So the another group of rats had a food placed in different location, which always required exactly the same pattern of turns from their starting location. So the group that had the food in the same location performed much better than the other group, supposedly demonstrating that he had learned a location rather than the specific sequence of turns. This is tendency to learn location signified that rats somehow form cognitive maps that help them perform well on the maze. Nangangahulugan na ang mga daga sa paanuman ay nakabuo ng cognitive na mapa na tumulong sa kanila na mahusay na gumanap sa maze. Nalaman din niya na ang mga organismo ay pipili ng pinakamaikling o pinakamadaling landas upang makamit ang isang layunin. At na-apply din natin ito sa ating sarili. So, that just like for example, since a student passed the same route going to school every day, he acquires a cognitive map of location of his school. So when transportation rerouting is done, he can still figure out what turns to make to get school the shortest way or easiest way. So kitag di kay kanang mangita man gitong shortcut di ba? Umo ayon nga, uy, mas dali ta diri ang makapunta sa atong gusto adtuan. So katugid atong pilion, right? So we form a cognitive maps. And it does not just apply to human being, but also apply to animals. Just like in his example, the cognitive maps in rats. So let's proceed. So in latent learning, it is a kind of learning that remains or stays with the individual until needed. It can exist even without reinforcement. He demonstrated this in his rat experiments wherein rats apparently learned the maze by forming cognitive maps of the maze, but manifested this knowledge of the maze only when they needed to. Ibig sabihin nito, maaari itong umiral kahit walang reinforcement. Dahil in his experiments, na ipakita na ang daga ay natutunan ang maze sa pamamagitan ng pagbuo ng cognitive na mapa. Ngunit ipinakita lamang ang kaalamang ito sa maze kapag kailangan nila. Dahil ang latent learning isang uri ng pag-aaral na nananatili sa individual hanggang sa kailangan nito. As it applied to human learning, just for example, a 2-year-old always see her dad operate the TV remote control and observe how the TV is turned on how the TV channel is changed and volume adjusted. So after some time, the parents are surprised that on the first time that the daughter holds the remote control, she already knows which button to press for what function. So through latent learning, the child knew the skills beforehand, even though she has never done them before. So it can exist even without reinforcement, without having support. So the latent learning remains or stays with individual until needed. So let's talk about the intervening variables. So intervening variables are variables that are not readily seen but serve as determinants of behavior. Tolman believed that learning is mediated or is influenced by expectation, perceptions, representation, and needs of and other internal or environmental variables. So just for example, in his experiments that rats found that hunger was an intervening variable. So why is it that hunger was an intervening variable? So does anyone know? Do you have any idea? So it is because an intervening variable links a stimulus and response and relates them to each other. In the running rats example, hunger is an intervening variable because it changes the rat's behavior. So that's why it's an intervening variable. So, according to Tolman, reinforcement is not essential for learning, although it provides an incentive for performance. But in his studies, he observed that a rat was able to acquire knowledge of the way through maze to develop a cognitive map, even in the absence of reinforcement. And that's what he really believed. So, yan talaga yung paniniwala niya. So we're done discussing about Tolman purposive behaviorism. So let's talk about Albert Bandura's social learning theory. As it focuses on the learning that occurs within social context, it considers that people learn from one another, including such concepts as observational learning, imitation, and modeling. So, ibig sabihin nito na ang tao ay natututo sa isa't isa, including na dito yung imitasyon at pamumudilo at obserbasyon sa pag-aaral. So, just for example, napanood ng isang bata ang pagbitay kay Saddam sa TV at tiyak na ginaya niya ito. So dito nakikita na people learn from one another at ginaya niya ito. So, pasok siya dito sa social learning theory. So let's talk about the general principle of social learning theory. So number one, people can learn by observing the behavior of others and the outcomes of those behavior. So ibig sabihin nito, maaring matuto sa pamamagitan ng pagmamasid sa pag-uugali ng iba at sa mga resulta ng pag-uugali iyon. So just for example, just by looking at some person na kung paano niya tatuhin ng isang tao, ang babalik din sa kanya ay mabuti rin. Because the outcomes of those behavior, kung ano yung pinapakita mo sa isang tao, babalik din sa iyo yan. So number two, learning can occur without a change in behavior. So maaaring mangyari ang pagkatuto ng walang pagbabago sa sarili. Number three, cognitive plays a role without a change in behavior. So over the last 30 years, social learning theory has become increasingly cognitive in its interpretation of human learning. Awareness and expectation of future reinforcement or punishment can have a major effect on the behaviors that people exhibit. And number four, social learning theory can be considered a bridge or transition between behavior learning theories and cognitive learning theories. So, ibig sabihin nito, ang teorya ng panlipunang pag-aaral ay maaaring ituring na isang tulay o isang transisyon sa pagitan ng mga teorya ng pag-aaral. So, lahat ng mga nabanggit ko ay bahagi ng general principle of social learning theory. So, how the environment reinforces and punishes modeling. So, people are often reinforced for modeling the behavior of others. Bandura suggested that the environment also reinforces modeling. This is in several possible ways. Number one, the observer is reinforced by the model. Just for example, Christine, who changed dresses to fit with a certain group of students, has a strong likelihood of being accepted and thus reinforced by that group. Because if gusto man niya mapitid tuwa, so there is a possible na ma-accept siya kay iya manggibagay yung kaguling dito sa isa ka grupo. So number two, the observer is reinforced by a third person. So the observer might be modeling the action of someone else. For example, an outstanding class leader or student, say si Taraw, si Ana. So the teacher noticed this and compliments and praises of the observer for modeling such behavior, thus reinforcing that behavior. So number three, the imitated behavior itself leads to reinforcing consequences. So many behaviors that we learn from others produce satisfying or reinforcing result. For example, si Maria, a student in the multimedia class, could observe how the extra work of a classmate does is fun. So this student in turn would do the same extra work and also experience enjoyment nga gibuhat sa iyang classmate. Number three, consequences of most behavior affect the observer's behavior vicariously. So this is known as vicarious reinforcement. This is where the model is reinforced for a response and then the observer shows an increase in that same person. So in this, Bandura illustrated this by having the students watch a film of model hitting and inflated a clown doll. So one group of children saw the model being praised for such action. So ilang nakuanan, okay dito, do dito. So without being reinforced, the group of children began to also hit the doll. So this is the um, in several possible way on how the environment reinforces and punishes modeling. So let's talk about the contemporary social learning perspective of reinforcement and punishment. So number one, contemporary theory proposes that both reinforcement and punishment have indirect effects on learning. They are not sole or main cause. So, na siya kaning indirect effects on learning ang reinforcement of punishment diri. Number two, reinforcement and punishment influence the extent to which an individual exhibit a behavior that has been learned. So, the reinforcement and punishment diri maka-influence siya dito to sa isa ka tao on how exhibit the behavior that has been learned na iyang nahibaw-an na. And number three, the expectation of reinforcement influences cognitive processes that promote learning. So therefore, attention plays a critical role in learning. And attention is influenced by the expectation of reinforcement. And example would be when the teacher tells a group of students that what they will study next is not on the test. So students will not pay attention because they do not expect to know the information for a test. Muna siya ang kanang sa expectation sa reinforcement baka impluwensya siya dito sa cognitive process sa nag-promote og learning. So let's talk about the cognitive factors in social learning. So social learning theory has a cognitive factors as well as behaviorist factors. So number one, learning without performance. So Bandura makes the distinction between learning through observation and actual imitation of what has been learned. This is similar to Tolman's latent learning lang siya. Number two, cognitive processing during learning. So social learning theories contend that attention is critical factor in learning. So yeah, so the attention is critical factor in learning ba siya when it comes to the cognitive process during learning because having it kanang para makuha nimo isa ka attention sa isa ka tao di ba lisod ba siya kung labi na kung dili ganahan maminaw. So mo ni siya ang kaning cognitive processing during learning is a critical factor. Number three, the expectation. So as a result of being reinforced, people from expectation about the consequences that future behaviors are likely to bring, they expect certain behaviors to bring reinforcement and others to bring punishment. So the learner needs to be aware, however, of the response reinforcement and response punishment. Reinforcement increases a response only when the learner is aware of that connection. Number four, reciprocal causation. So Bandura proposed that behavior can influence both the environment and the person. So in fact, each of these three variables, the person, the behavior, and the environment can have influence on each other. So there are three variables, which is the person, the behavior, and the environment is influenced on each other. So connected din siya. So number five, modeling. So there are different types of model. There is a live model, an actual person demonstrating the behavior. There can also be a symbolic model, which can be a person or action portrayed in some other video. So those that I mentioned is the learning without performance, cognitive processing during learning, expectation, reciprocal causation, and modeling are the cognitive factors in social learning. Also, behaviors that can be learned through modeling. So many behaviors can be learned at least partly through modeling. So just for example, the teacher kay nag-discuss siya. So iyang mga estudyante mingon siya nga, "Oh, grabe si ma'am, uy ka-uptick niya, uy ka-bright niya." So ang teacher dito nag-model siya sa iyang mga estudyante. How unsa niya pag-discuss ug daghay ma-learn ang iyang mga student. Also, moral thinking and moral behavior are influenced by observation and modeling. So how you think, how you act, maka-influence gyud siya na kay by just observation lang sa isa ka tawo o sa pag-unsa sa kanang na role model ka. Also, this includes moral judgment regarding right and wrong which can impart through modeling. So, kung unsa ka ano mo judge ba, kung unsa ang sakto, unsa ang tama, maka-impart na sa iyahang panghunahuna sa isa ka bata. Labi na kanang mga gagmay pa mingon sila, "Ma'am, sakto ni o mali?" So, dito nimo makuan nga, "Oh, mao ni sakto, mao pud ni mali." So there are also conditions necessary for effective modeling to occur. So Bandura mentioned four conditions that are necessary before an individual can successfully model the behavior of someone else. So number one, the attention. So the person must first pay attention to the model. Number two, retention. The observer must be able to remember the behavior that has been observed. One way of increasing this is using the technique of rehearsal. So number three, the motor reproduction. So the third condition is the ability to replicate the behavior that the model has just demonstrated. So this means that the observer has to be able to replicate the action, which could be a problem with the learner who is not ready developmentally to replicate the action. Just for example, little children have difficulty doing complex physical motion. So number four, the motivation. The final necessary ingredient for modeling to occur is motivation. Learners must want to demonstrate what they have learned. So remember that since these four conditions vary among individuals, different people will reproduce the same behavior differently. So let's proceed to the effects on modeling on behavior. So modeling teaches new behaviors. Of course, it teaches new behaviors. Number two, modeling influences the frequency of previously learned behaviors. And number three, may encourage previously forbidden behaviors. And number four, modeling increases the frequency of similar behaviors. For example, a student might see a friend excel in basketball and he tries to excel in football because he is not tall enough for basketball. So it is increases the frequency of similar behaviors. So these are the effects on modeling on behavior. And lastly, the educational implication of social learning theory. So social learning theory has numerous implications for classroom use. So number one, students often learn a great deal simply by observing other people. And number two, describing the consequences of behavior can effectively increase the appropriate behavior and decrease inappropriate ones, of course. So this can involve discussing with learners about the rewards and consequences of various behavior. And number three, modeling provides an alternative to shaping for teaching new behaviors. Instead of using shaping, which is operant conditioning, modeling can provide a faster, more efficient means for teaching new behavior. So to promote effective modeling, a teacher must make sure that the four essential conditions exist: attention, retention, motor reproduction, and the motivation. And number four, teacher and parents must model appropriate behaviors and take care that they do not model inappropriate behaviors. Of course, ang teacher gid ang parents must model nga maayo gyud dili magpakita og inappropriate behaviors. Kay ang bata ma-apply man pud nila gyud kay mo result man ako unsa ka pagpadako sa imuhang anak o kung unsa nimo pag-manage isa ka ang maestra kung unsa nimo i-manage imuhang estudyante. Kung unsa nimo pagtudo kanila. And number five, teacher should expose students to a variety of other models. So this technique is especially important to break down traditional stereotype yun. And that will be all. So before we end our discussion, we're going to have a pause test, the multiple choice. So instruction, write a letter of the correct answer on a 1/4 sheet of paper. So number one, Tolman recognized that research on rats could not uncover basic processes of human behavior. A, true. B, false. C, maybe. D, both. Number two, it was shown by Tolman and others that research on white rats would A, demonstrate the rule of reinforcement in learning. B, provide a basic foundation from which other studies could devise in order to replicate the result which with other species. C, provide insight into the basic processes underlying the behaviors of humans. And D, yield basic information on motivational and motivation. Number three, which of the following did Tolman not consider to be the cause of behavior? A, environmental stimuli. B, psychological drives. C, heredity. D, motivation. So number four, for Tolman, the obvious and objective behavioral evidence of purpose was A, that the rat readily leaves the start box of a maze. B, that the rat behaves so as to obtain food. C, learning. D, science gestal. So number five, Edward C. Tolman's system combining the objective study of behavior with the consideration of goal orientation in behavior is called A, molar behavior. B, stimulus response association. C. Intervening behaviorism. D. Purposive behaviorism. So kindly pass your paper in fun. So that will be all. Thank you and God bless you all. Bye.